Week 6 of Cultures and Societies of Arab-speaking countries with Safe Cultural Heritage Group. So this is the last week, and this week we will be covering the Middle East. So last week was about the Arabic African countries, and this week it's all about the Middle East. We will be covering quite a lot, and the PDF I've put up is very long, so I apologize for that, but there is so much I had to remove, but I tried to add in as much interesting information as possible, so I didn't want to omit anything. So week 6, the Middle East, the concept of nationalism from Egypt to Oman and its multiplicity and future. So although I haven't covered nationalism quite a lot, I still have given you a taste of the identity of each country. So the first country we will be covering is Kuwait, and Kuwait is a relatively new country created not long time ago. So it was in the 18th century. It was actually a tribal area. And we also have an instance in the 16th century where the Portuguese invaded that part of the Arabian Gulf. However, the Gulf is quite a new country. It was part of Mesopotamia before and was a very important port in the Indian Ocean. And Kuwait is a small country located in the Middle East on the Persian Gulf. The population of Kuwait, I have here the estimates of 2000, was about 2 million inhabitants. I'm sure it has doubled by now. And the official language is Arabic. Ethnic Kuwaitis struggle to maintain their cultural dominance in an increasingly complex society. So there are a lot of workers and other minorities in the country. So Kuwaitis have quite a strong sense of identity, perhaps because it's a fairly new country. They are still trying to find their place in the Arab world. Over the span of its 200 years, Kuwait shifted from a nomadic population to an urban population, and that has had an effect on the everyday encounters, the urbanization of the country, architecture, the mentality, and so on and so forth, because essentially they were tribal right before it became a oil-rich country. I've covered food, and I've covered etiquette, marriage, religion, and a bit about the arts in Kuwait. So in Kuwait, as in many Islamic countries, we can add that the art of calligraphy is one of the most long-standing and thriving forms of expression. So that is something that is thriving there right now. Food-wise, it's quite similar to other Arab countries like Iraq. And we are moving on now to Qatar, which is the tourist gem of the Middle East, together with UAE, of course. So in the 1700s, members of Al-Khalifa of the Utub tribe migrated to Qatar from Kuwait and Central Arabia and established a pearling and commercial base in Zubara in the north. So it was essentially a pearling area. Residents of Qatar can be divided into 3 groups: the Bedouin, Hadar, and the Abd. So the Bedouin trace their descendants from the nomads of the Arabian Peninsula, and the Abd, they are the descendants of slaves. So I presume as well it comes to skin color. So Qatar has quite a small percentage of its own inhabitants, as it has a lot of workers there. And it's a small peninsula on the western shore of the Arabian Gulf. In 2000, the population was estimated at about 500,000. I'm sure it has maybe tripled by now. The official language is Arabic and English, Farsi, and Urdu, as it has a close proximity to Asian countries. Many Qataris speak more than one language. That's very interesting. And it is very rare for immigrants to learn Arabic. So there's quite a divide between the workers and the nationals. When it comes to urbanism, Doha, the capital, houses more than 80% of the population. So that's quite interesting. I have added a bit about the gender roles, marriage, and the etiquettes about the Qataris. Let's move on now to Bahrain. So archaeological evidence dating back to the 3rd millennium BC indicates that Bahrain, or the island, the main island, probably was settled by Sumerians, so it has ancient history compared to the other countries that we've just covered, Kuwait and Qatar. So Portugal took control for a while, and eventually Al-Khalifa took control from the Persians in 1763. In the 1830s, the British signed several treaties with Bahrain, offering protection from the Turks in exchange for access in the Persian Gulf. So Bahrain has a very important location when it comes to world trade. In ancient times, Bahrain was part of an empire known as Dilmun. It was later called Tyros by the Greeks, and the name Bahrain comes from Bahr, which is sea. Bahrain means two seas. So Bahrain is an archipelago made of Bahrain Islands and 30 smaller islands. So it's actually islands. That's quite interesting. And the estimated population in 2000 was also almost 500,000, probably much more now. The ethnic relations I found quite interesting about Bahrain, as it has expatriates constitute about 20% of the society. They come in from other Arab countries and a lot from Asia. The vast majority are temporary workers and just transient in the country. So that's quite interesting to see that they have a lot of migrants that come and go. I've covered other parts, and we can also finish with art, which is Manama has several galleries that show the works of both nationals and expatriates, and government programs preserve traditional art and crafts. So that's quite interesting. So Bahrain has a bit more rich, older culture than the other countries we've covered. And lastly but not least, UAE, of course. So before 1971, the 7 Emirates were collectively known as the Trucial States, a name that originated from maritime agreements between the British and the leading sheikhs of elder tribes that inhabited the area. So the United Arab Emirates consist of 7 small emirates. So it's Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Ras Al Khaimah, Ajman, and Al Qaywain and Fujairah, which were united as a federal state in 1971. So that's quite a new country or new federation of islands. Demography, it has a very small population, and also linguistically it is Arabic, of course, with a lot of expatriates and migrants that work there. So before the 1960s, that's very interesting, the only settlements were small towns and villages, so it has literally boomed. So it's quite interesting how many of these countries have just become something else from what it was in the past. I have covered foods, gender roles, marriage. I can't cover it now. It's too much to cover. But it is interesting to see that Islam, of course, dominates all aspects of the most Emiratis. And it's also a tourist country or touristic country, just like the others. Oil-rich country, very Arab national country, very proud population, and also lots of expatriates and migrants and workers coming and going into these countries. So on to part 2. To the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen and Oman. So Saudi Arabia has an ancient history. It was a trading point between the Horn of Africa and other parts of the Middle East, such as Egypt, Syria. It had contact with the Roman Empire, with the Byzantine empires. So it has a rich history of different tribal confederation in the area. And today it is called Saudi Arabia, but before it was just a large land mass that had different Arabic tribes in it. And during Islam, that is where the center of Islam is. So this is where the Prophet Muhammad spread his message from. However, it was in Saudi Arabia back then. It was just the Arabian Peninsula. And eventually a family that were called Al Saud, or a tribe, took over the land through an agreement with the British to disconnect from the Ottoman Empire and become the custodian of the two holy sites, Mecca and Medina. So today, Saudi Arabia holds the two most holy sites in Islam. In Arabic, it is called Al-Mamlaka Al-Arabiya Saudiya, which means the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So it is a kingdom essentially, and it is also called the original homeland of the Arab people, which is interesting. It is connected to Islam in many ways, as for instance, its ruler is called the custodian of the two holy mosques. And today it has become quite a touristic country, so it does allow outsiders if you get a tourist visa. And it has areas that are quite different from each other. So you have the Baqi', which is in the north, which is mountainous, and then you have some areas where they have seafaring people. So Saudi Arabia occupies a large land mass, and the population in 2000 was 20 million, and it has increased a lot in the last 20 years. Arabic is the main language, of course, classical Arabic, especially because the Quranic Arabic is used widely in formal ways, of course, and Saudi Arabians participate in a community, so they do believe in the Muslim Ummah, which is a nation. However, they're also quite proud of their country. It is quite a new kingdom, like other kingdoms in the Middle East, and it has developed quite quickly, like other rich oil countries. So in the 1950s, about 40% of the population was nomadic, so that's quite interesting. I have added a bit about the food, the gender roles, marriage. So from the information that I've put, it's quite a traditional society with very strong tribal roots and customs. And on to Yemen now. So Yemen has also a rich history. So the ancient walled city of Sana'a, for example, is said to be the oldest city in the world, and founded by Noah's eldest son Shem. So it is from biblical stories. And also the kingdom of Saba, with its capital Marib, has existed since the first millennium. So it has a strong historical importance. And eventually, in the 7th century, Islam reached Yemen and became, before it was quite a Christian center, became Muslim. And the name of the country is derived from the legendary ancestor. So Yemen, the son of Qahtan, or from the Arabic root Yumn, the right. So Yemen is located to the right of the Meccan sanctuary, so that's quite interesting. And Yemen had a strong, or is the name of a country even during the spread of Islam. That is why it's called pre-Islamically as well. And Yemen did play an important role in the spread of Islam, or its connection with Mecca and Medina. The population is ethnically Arab, divided between Sunni Muslims and the Shafi'i school, and Shia Muslim of the Zaydi school. So they have two predominantly Islamic schools of thought. Yemenis speak Arabic, which belongs to the Semitic language, of course, and they also use English and Russian, as it has previously been communist. So that's quite interesting. Yemen is also quite a economically poor country compared to the rich countries that we just covered. So that's also important to state. Unfortunately, even with its rich history, it has had political turmoil, and also drought and other factors have led to how it is today. I have covered, like the others, gender roles, marriage, etc., which I can't cover now because there's too much. So now we move on to Oman, which is a more modern country. That has also tourism. However, it's quite traditional, and it has a long history, known as Magan to ancient Persians, and was part of the Mesopotamian civilization. So that's quite, it is quite striking about Oman because it's not very well known. It is also in part of an oil rich country. It's a sultanate and it's a very peaceful country. So the Omani national identity has evolved from a predominantly Arab language, but also it has a quite a mixed society as it's very close to parts of, so for instance, India. So they have what they call Baluchis, or people that identify themselves as being from Balochistan in Asia, and that have then migrated several generations. Sorry, I couldn't find the word. Several generations, and then still disconnect to it. So the Omani culture owes much to the geography of the country. The cultural heartland lies in the interior. It has valleys, it has mountains, it has seas to the north, and it has a strong oceanic society. So it has a strong connection to the ocean, and that is where Baluchis come in. And it has served as a capital. So it has served as an important seaport for a long time. Linguistically, Arabic is the principal language spoken by the Omanis, and the Omani dialect generally is close to modern standard Arabic. They also have words from Persian, Urdu, Gujarati, and Baluchi due to its connection with Asia. And I've added, of course, other information about it. Nearly all Omanis are Muslims, divided nearly equal into Sunnis and Ibadis, with a small percentage of Shia. A few families of Indian origin are Hindu. There are no Omani Christians or Jews. So Omanis also are very tolerant people, so there are not much sectarian issues or ethnic or anything like that. It is a very fairly calm and traditional and open society. Part 3, Egypt and Iraq. Why I couple these two countries is because they are both very ancient civilizations and have had an important role in the area. So first we start with Egypt. So the land of Egypt has a distinctiveness as it has been part of several civilizations: Greco-Roman, Pharaonic, Christian, and Muslim. And it is also called the 7,000 years of civilization. Today it is a touristic country with quite a unstable political sphere. However, it has survived. It did survive the Arab Spring and is started thriving again. It has been has played a major role in Arab nationalism. For instance, in the 1950s, Gamal Abdel Nasser took over or abolished the monarchy in the country, and since then it's become more or less a military state. Egypt is the internationally used name in the Western world, and it derives from the Greek Aegyptus. And however, in the Muslim or Arab world, it is called Misr, and it is also mentioned in the Quran. So that's quite interesting. It's quite a very ancient name. So the population of Egypt is relatively homogeneous. The overwhelming majority are Arab-speaking Sunni Muslims, and a percentage of them are Christians as well. So there is a large community of Coptic Christians in the country due to its past history. There are also a few small linguistic minorities, of which the largest is the Nubians, who speak two Nubian languages, Kanuz and Mahaz, and they're related to the Nilo-Saharan languages of Sudan. However, they represent quite a small percentage in the country. Egypt is quite a large area, and its population is concentrated around the Nile, as the Nile receives about 85% of its water from the Ethiopian highlands. And before the construction of dams and barrages, floodwaters would spill out on the river's banks and channel, and eventually create an agricultural societies around the Nile. By the year 2000, the population was quite high, about 65,000, and it's probably increased by now as well. And it's also predicted to double by 2029. That's quite interesting. It has a large population. Its main language is Arabic, and they also speak English as a second language, followed by French, due to its past history and also because there is some tourism as well. Villages and city are two major settlement types, so there have been, however, an increasing overlap in social and economic functions. It is overpopulated. The main buildings that people live in are actually apartments in the cities. However, there is also a large rural community and also nomads in more desertous areas. I have mentioned food, marriage, etiquette, quite a lot actually. There was a lot of information about Egypt, and quite intricate society, very vibrant and very different. About Iraq, so the Iraq also has a very rich history. So the area of Mesopotamia has been under the control of a lot of civilizations. So we have the Sumerians, we have the Turks eventually, before the modern Baptist political leaders took over Iraq, and that is where Saddam is also. He's from this political party. So I have mentioned a bit about the history. Modern Iraq today covers almost the same area as ancient Mesopotamia. However, some of its borders were actually put there by the British. And it also has a very large cultural group that are called the Kurds in the north, compared to other countries in the Middle East, as the Kurds actually occupy other countries as well around. Iraq in the Middle East is comparable to the size, so it's quite a large size and is quite central, as it covers a central area between Asia and the Middle East or the Near East. The population Iraq was in 2000 was about 23 million. It has decreased due to wars and migration. So there has been a large migration of Iraqis into Europe and the US, for instance, and Australia, due to the ethnic instability, due to the wars, due to the conflicts in the area, especially after 2003 when the Americans entered. It is an old, rich country, however, it has struggled economically, politically, and so on. Iraq's economy was once based on agriculture. However, due to oil production and economic boom hit Iraq in the 1970s, and it changed the economy and also the interest of outsiders in the country. It has a very strong cultural identity, although it has a lot of minorities. For instance, there are Turkmenis, there are Yazidis, there's Kurds, there's Christians. There's so many minorities in Iraq, Jews as well. There was a large minorities of Jews before the creation of Israel, and Iraq has or is still developing as a country. So on to part 4. So part 4, Levant countries, Syria, Lebanon and Jordan. So in Arabic, this area is called Ash-Sham, and that it comprised of these 3 countries, including Israel, during or historically, during the Muslim caliphates. It has a very rich history. So it was part of the Ebla kingdom. Later on, it became part of the Phoenicians, or it became a Phoenician trading post. It was conquered by the Persians as well. The Romans took over, and Syria was a target as well during the Middle Ages of the Crusades, but the Arabs ultimately defeated the invaders and took over the area. It has had an important role when it comes, for instance, to some caliphates such as the Umayyad, as Syria or Damascus was its center of rule. Eventually, a leader of radical Arab Socialist Party, the Ba'ath, which is the same as in Iraq, seized control in 1971, and since then it has been more or less the same family that have ruled the country. The last few decades have proved to be quite hard for Syria, and there has been a large outflow of refugees from Syria, unfortunately, and also rebel fighters that have caused quite some sectarian violence in the area, unfortunately, and religious. However, Syria is a beautiful and ancient country that was, of course, set up by the British and divided. So Lebanon became part of the French rule, and then Syria became also part of the French rule, and also the British took over. So Syria, or Syria in Arabic, is the name that was given to the region by the Greeks and Romans, and probably derives from the Babylonian Suri. Arabs traditionally refer to Syria as a large, vaguely defined surrounding area as a Sham, as I mentioned before. However, Damascus played an important role. The population in 2000 was about 16 million. It might have decreased due to instability. They also have a percentage of Kurds in the northern area, and of Turks, Armenians. However, the Armenians that fled to Turkey between 1925 and 1945, many of them resided in Syria. They have also a number of Circassians, Assyrians, and Jews. Arabic is the official language, and the Syrian dialect is quite similar to Jordanian and Egyptian, but it varies as well, of course. There is also the language of the minorities, and also due to colonial influence, French and English are used in interactions. Syria is ethnically very homogeneous, so about 90 or 80% of the population do identify as Arabs. However, due to its rich history, with Crusade being under Turkey, being partly Arab, but also having some connection with other ethnic ethnicities, we know as Arabs that Syrians, you might find a diversity of colors. So some Syrians actually look very European, with light hair, light eyes, and light skin, and some look very dark. So there is quite a contrast in just physically in Syrians. However, they are known in Arab world being quite light compared to other Arab countries. Traditionally, Syria is not. It does have some tribal communities, however less, and it has a strong sense of pride in their country and Arab nationalism, of course. I have covered, of course, marriage etiquette and also religion. We can cover that now. So 74% of the population is Sunni Muslim, and 16% belongs to the Alawite, the ones that have politically taken over, and the Druze, which are also a Muslim minority that exist in that area and in the Lebanon. So I would actually recommend you to read a bit more about the Druze. About the arts, so the Ministry of Culture and National Guidance promotes national culture, and most publishing houses are owned by the state, as it has quite some control over the what is published, and the arts, of course, and the humanities. So on to Lebanon, which is further north. Lebanon is actually referred to as the Paris of the Middle East, due to it being a very modern country with beautiful seaside cities. It's quite touristic, and also have a large population of Christians, and have had actually an influence, even political influence on the country. However, today it has experienced some instability within the country. It has had sectarian violence earlier, and it has also quite a diverse population of Muslims, Shia, Sunnis, and Druze, and also Christians. The first cities to emerge in Lebanon were built by the maritime people. It is interesting that even the name Lubnan derives from the Phoenician for white mountain. So the name of Lebanon is also ancient. Lebanon is bounded on the north and east by Syria and the west by the Mediterranean. Um, Around, so the population also is quite small, as it is quite a small country. Most, and of course, as it has had sectarian violence, Lebanese are present throughout the world. There are large communities of Lebanese in South America. There are business-minded people that travel around and conduct or open enterprises. And most of Lebanon's population lives in the main city of Beirut. It's quite overpopulated, and also Tripoli and Sidon were densely populated. Most people live in apartments. However, there are some area in the more agricultural areas that live or house. They live in different housing. Lebanese cuisine is Mediterranean, and it has quite a strong art deriving from Lebanon. So a lot of singers are from there, concerts. A lot of artists are self-supporting in Lebanon, as there's no official government allocation of money for the art. And Lebanon has a long history of excellent poets, novelists, and also local crops are encouraged. Oriental and Western music are both popular, and they also hold international festivals. On to Jordan. Jordan is a relatively new country, and also it was an area that was well known as the Jordan Valley. It has a rich history. However, as a country, it's fairly new. So the Emirate of Transjordan, with the name given by this small state when it was recognized in 1921 after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And it was part of the Transjordan area and it merged with part of Palestine. Jordan has a large percentage of Palestinians in living there, or actually even identifying as Palestinian, as Jordanians, they've been there for a couple of generations. Jordan is a relatively small country that lies in the center of the Middle East, sharing its northern border with Syria, eastern border with Iraq, and southern eastern borders with Saudi Arabia and then also Israel. However, it has had quite a stable and peaceful relationship with neighboring countries, even though it is quite central in the conflicts. We have my cat here. Linguists is speaking Arabic as the official language. They also have quite a strong tribal and nomadic traditions and identity. Traditionally, Bedouin tribes have lived in the traditional way for thousands of years. They roam freely and pay little attention to borders. As I said, Palestinians do form quite a large percentage of the society. Most people live in apartments, as it's quite new, fairly new cities that have emerged. It's quite a modern and forward-going country. The state religion is Muslim, and there is very little ethnicity, so most Jordanians are Muslims. They have about 6% only of Christians. In the year 2000, King Abdullah, as its kingdom, ordered that government workers be given Fridays and Saturdays off, hoping they would find time to develop new interests and travel to sites like Petra, which is an important site touristically. So on to part 5. So part 5, diplomatic relation and aspects of heritage and national pride. So I did concentrate this part on the Arab League, which was formed or founded in 1945 by one of them, the main being Egypt, the main country being Egypt. However, it was meant or designed to become or create the Arab unity in practice. It was imposed. So what it would do is try to solve issues within the region, something that the Arab League hasn't been successful in since its first creation. So this part just does speak about the challenges it has faced with COVID, for instance, and the challenges it has faced with conflicts in the area. So it has been actually a league that has mostly served its own members economically, strategically, politically, rather than served as a tool to solve issues in the region, as the Middle East is quite a complex region with many ethnicities and many issues, political issues, some countries being quite rich and some being different. And this has also caused quite a rift between the countries within the League. So broadly speaking, the Arab League does not appear to be coordinating a meaningful response to any conflicts or the outbreak that has happened recently. The pandemic, for instance, has had an effect on the Middle East, especially the humanitarian disasters that exist in refugee camps in some area of the Middle East. For instance, Syria, this hasn't been hasn't been voiced and it has been disregarded. So this is something that I am putting in this part of the PDF about what kind of issues the Arab League have had to face and if they have been able to face them successfully. Finally, part 6, and in this part I am speaking about stereotypes and perceptions of being Arab in today's world. So I've put some scenarios, for instance, some stereotypes that are quite quite prevalent here in the Western world. Of course, not everyone believes in them. However, it is interesting to go through them. For instance, the first one being all Arabs have the same culture, and this is something that is incorrect. We have seen by covering all these Arab countries that each country has their own history, their own richness, and their own diversity. All Arabs look the same? Absolutely not. You have all shades, from being the lightest to the darkest. All Arabs live in the desert? They do not. We have now metropolitan large cities, we have modern cities, we have more ancient cities, and we have more traditional cities. So being Arab also means being a multitude of things, and there is not one culture, one look. It is something that is very diverse. For instance, another perception is all women stay at home, and that has also to do with the religious connotation of it, and that is something that is incorrect. Many Muslim and Arab women are very active in society, are very active politically, and also active just as citizens. We have strong family values, so you do find that a lot of women actually choose to be stay-at-home moms. However, it's something that is individual and something chosen by each woman that identifies as an Arab. Arabs are violent. That is connected to terrorism, for instance, as a lot of terrorists are portrayed as being Arab, and that is absolutely not true. As violence in the Middle East is not inevitable, and the vast majority of people in the region want peace and stability. And of course, there are historical reasons why there is instability today. And last but not least, all Arabs are Muslims and all Muslims are Arabs, which is absolutely incorrect. The majority of Muslims actually reside in Southeast Asia, and not all Arabs identify as Muslims, either for personal reasons or because they are Christian or Jews or from any other minorities. So these perceptions have been, of course, influenced by media, by how Arabs are portrayed in movies, and it's something that has had an effect on anyone that do not have much experience with Arab people. So being Arab ultimately means being someone that identifies with Arab culture, speaks probably Arabic, and also believes that they have some Arab ancestry. So that is the last of it. I hope you enjoyed these 6 weeks, and hopefully you have learned something and it has opened up your mind about what being Arab means and how rich and diverse Arab countries are.